in my opinion, the pendulum has begun to swing too far. And what does that lead to? It leads to not a little discontent and not just the right wing, it leads to much larger discontent and risking the pendulum swinging back.
A controversial new piece in Compact magazine written by Jacob Savage makes the claim that beginning in 2014, classically liberal American institutions intentionally avoided hiring white men. In fact, the piece claims that some institutions even admitted that they were outright discriminating against white men. So the piece is called Lost Generation. And before we get to the details and the arguments that are made within the piece, Cenk, your 2 cents?
Well, so there's a theory that white people or males or whoever's in the majority cannot be discriminated against. That theory is false. So were there good reasons to discriminate against white men, and did that discrimination happen? Well, let's find out first, and then we'll discuss.
So the piece alleges that for about a decade, young white men have been systematically shut out of various institutions, including journalism, academia, and even Hollywood. Now, bear with us while we present the receipts that were provided in the piece. It's not like it was just, a big ranting article with no actual evidence. And honestly, some of this evidence is pretty damning. So Savage argues that DEI initiatives disproportionately hurt young white men who were trying to start their professional lives. So here's some data to prove it. And keep in mind that the white men represent about 30% of the American population, 30%. Okay. So in 2011, white men were 48% of lower level TV writers, obviously overrepresented, but nonetheless, 48% of lower level TV writers. But by 2024, they accounted for just 11.9%. So you can see the same pattern playing out at America's top universities. So white men fell from 39% of tenure track positions in the humanities at Harvard in 2014 to just 18% in 2023. At Berkeley, as recently as 2015, white male hires were 52.7% of new tenure track faculty. In 2023, they were 21.5%. So of the 59 assistant professors in arts, humanities, and social science appointed at UC Santa Cruz between 2020 and 2024, only 2 were white men, 3%. And the same thing is playing out in the field of journalism as well. So since 2020, nearly 2/3 of the Atlantic's hires have been women, along with nearly 50% people of color. In 2018, the New York Times replaced its summer internship with a year-long fellowship. Just 10% of the nearly 220 fellows have been white men. So one factor that I want a little more clarity on is, look, men in general have been falling behind in the country. So if you look at graduation rates at the top universities, period, women are earning degrees at a higher rate than men. Is that possibly a factor that plays a role in what's happening? Could be. But that doesn't account for the fact that some of these institutions are just outright saying, yeah, we're not hiring young white men. And that is discriminatory. And I think that's an overcorrection of what, used to be a problem where other people were discriminated against and white men were hired over women or people of color. So I do think this is an issue. And what I worry about, and I think we do see it to some extent, Cenk, is backlash and resentment and anger. And I don't want that to happen. And I don't want anyone to be discriminated against. I want to live in a meritocracy. We don't. I want to be clear about that. And that has less to do with race and more to do with connections and how affluent a person's family happens to be. But at the same time, race-based hiring or gender-based hiring can be an issue, especially if there's outright discrimination taking place.
Yeah, so I think for this story, context is everything. So for example, you could look at older Young Turks videos, and we've been around 20 years now. We're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary on YouTube. And say, wait a minute, Cenk, I remember you guys saying that, oh, boo-hoo, white men, you just don't have enough power. You guys are complaining for no reason. Yeah, we might have said that in 2011, for example, when, just take one of these stats here, I could use two of them, when 48% of the TV writers were white males. That's already disproportionately high. So what is the percentage of white males in the country? Very important to know so you can level set here, 31%. So back in 2011, they were way overrepresented in Berkeley professors at 52%, TV writers at 48%, et cetera. Now, at some point, it started to get to a point where there was a balancing out, and now the pendulum has swung the other way. And some folks on the left will say, no, you can't discriminate. There is no racism against white people because they were in power. Well, unless they're not in power, because yeah, they might be in power in the government and in many other contexts, but maybe they're not in power at Berkeley or at the Atlantic or in other institutions. And now, when you look at the numbers today, TV writers, they're down to 12%. Well, that's nowhere near 31%. At Berkeley, they're down to 21.5%, et cetera. Now, do you have to hit 31% exactly? No, that would ironically be a quota, right? And what's the system you should use to hire people? I'd like to think it's the system we use, which is I don't give a damn. I don't care if you're white, black, Asian, old, young, men. I don't care. And what kind of staff do we have? We have an incredibly diverse staff because we hired the best people we could, right? And so to me, that's inarguably the right system, especially after you've gotten past the original problem. The original problem was white males had all of the positions. So I interviewed Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, and I don't agree with him on a million things, but I wanted to hear his perspective. And he became a right winger because in his perspective, his mind, his way of viewing it, he had been denied several promotions and his bosses had told him, it's because you're a white man and we have too many white men in management positions. And that made him super angry and bitter and led him in a right-wing direction. Now,
I remember, sorry, go ahead, Jake, finish your thought.
Yeah, when you do that, when you're trying to introduce African Americans and women into the workforce at all, into management at all, yeah, I can see why Scott Adams would be mad. But then how about all the black people who never got a chance? They're also mad, right?
Exactly.
And they need to get a chance to do that. But now, when we have this level of data on how white men are now disfavored, young white men from getting hired, in my opinion, the pendulum has begun to swing too far. And what does that lead to? It leads to not a little discontent and not just the right wing, it leads to much larger discontent and risking the pendulum swinging back.
Yeah, and the resentment I don't think is healthy for any society, right? And I think all of us have, not all of us, but many people have similar stories to what Scott Adams experienced. Like I remember, I was so irritated by this. This is many years ago. I think it was 2012, but I flew out to New York City to take a meeting with the executive producer of The View. And I'm just gonna be honest with you guys. I wasn't even really that interested in being a host on The View, but I'm like, wow, they want to meet with me. Sure, why not? We'll go all the way across the country to New York City to have this meeting. It was a great meeting, loved me, but it ended with, you're great, you'd be great for the show. It's just that we're looking for a Latina, right? And I'm just like, okay. And I just remember thinking to myself at that moment, I think that's discrimination, but like, who am I to make a big deal about it? Like, I'm happy with what I'm doing for work already. I don't really want to move to New York City to do this job anyway. So I didn't make a big stink about it. But I can totally understand others being infuriated by that because it's supposed to be based on the merit of, your accomplishments, your work, all of that. Again, we all know that the real world doesn't actually work that way. But the other thing that I'll mention, aside from the personal anecdotes of outright discrimination, some of these organizations are just admitting that they're engaging in discrimination. So a man by the name of so an anonymous senior hiring editor at a major outlet told Savage for this piece, for a typical job, we'd get a couple hundred applications, probably at least 80 from white guys. it was a given that we weren't going to hire the best person. It was jarring how we would talk about excluding white guys. That's not good. Okay, that is discrimination, and that is what we're trying to move away from. Like, it shouldn't be seen as you either discriminate against people of color or white people. How about we just don't discriminate? We don't bake in discriminatory policies at the workplace. A man by the name of James stated that over the years at a top classics program, he watched underqualified candidates get tenure track offers because they checked certain identity boxes. My own advisors would say very openly, they're just two completely different hiring schemes. There's just two completely different categories of person. Meanwhile, over in Hollywood, studios and talent agencies were racing to fill quotas. So a whistleblower sent me a document from early 2017 across the grid, which tracks staffing needs for TV writers' rooms. The same shorthand appears dozens of times: diverse, female, women, and diverse only. And Savage also writes that this was systematic discrimination, documented in writing, implemented without consequence. It's striking how casual it all was. Chicago Fire, the upper level can be anyone, but we need diverse staff writers. So yeah, it's just, I think it's easy to kind of brush this piece off as like, oh, poor white men, but the receipts do lead to a pretty compelling argument here. And I'm just against discrimination of all forms. I just don't think it's helpful.
So, like in the case of Anna, we never talked about it on air. We didn't make a big deal out of it. In fact, not a big deal. We made no deal out of it. And partly because like TV is a little bit of a different animal too. Like if you want to be able to represent your viewers, and like it's just a different formula. For example, in cities that are heavily African American, you'll have more African American local TV anchors. In cities that have a more of an Asian population, you'll see more Asian anchors. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, right? I get what they're trying to do. So it's a little bit different. On the other hand, if you're a doctor or you're a writer, I don't know that we need that kind of diversity, as part of the job. But we still don't do it, and we have enormous diversity. We just hire the best people. But guys, like in the beginning, you needed affirmative action, otherwise nobody could break in. But if you continue affirmative action forever, number one, it eventually leads to the pendulum swinging so much that you have reverse discrimination, which is what we're seeing here. That leads to huge resentment throughout the country. And by the way, white folks, if you're resentful about this, can you now empathize with black folks and women and other minorities who felt just as resentful earlier when they weren't allowed into these careers, right?
Yeah, that's
and
a great point.
Professions.
That's such a great point. And I want to end on this because I think this was a thought-provoking excerpt from Savage's piece. He writes, if you were 40 in 2014, born in 1974, beginning your career in the late 90s, you were already established. If you were 30 in 2014, you hit the wall because the mandates to diversify didn't fall on older white men who in many cases still wield enormous power. They landed on us.
Yeah, to that point, last couple points. What percentage of people in Congress are white males? 65%. So the older category is still stacked with white males in power. We argue for balance, and that's a tough position because people say, are you on the left or are you on the right? You have to be white or black or this, that. No, balance, that's the sensible thing to do. And finally, guys, at some point, we've got to be one nation. If we're not one nation and we're just a group of different individuals that happen to live next to each other, it's not gonna end well.
I agree.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.